Welcome, everyone. I think a few of you are probably still getting into the room, but we're so excited that you've joined us today as we talk about climate communications. We have a great panel set up, lots of really exciting voices in the conversation today. I'm Emma Wolf, VP and Climate Tech Practice Area Lead here at Kite Hill PR. Kite Hill is a tech PR and B2B communications agency. We work with leading companies across categories such as ad tech, media and entertainment, health tech, fintech, and of course, climate tech. So really excited to dive in. A couple of notes before we get started. Today's session will be recorded and available on Kite Hill's website within the next week. And we'll also have time for a brief Q&A at the end. So please send your questions in the little Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll try to cover as many as possible. Amy, Danielle, Sarah, so thrilled to have you all here. To kick off, I'd love if you guys can do a quick intro, just who you are, what you do, and then we can dive further into the discussion. Amy, you want to start us off?
Sure. First of all, good morning. Thanks for having me. And it's really a pleasure to be with this group to talk about this subject that really unites us all. I am a senior advisor at Meridian, an infrastructure developer, manager, and certified B Corp. We work across Europe, Africa, and the Americas, and we're focused on three specific types of infrastructure: critical public services, sustainable mobility, and innovative carbon solutions. I've been with the firm for a decade, and prior to that, I was working in very different areas. So sort of the previous and the present, I think, are an interesting subject for conversation among this group this morning as well.
Fantastic. Sarah, would you like to go?
Sure. Hi. It's really nice to be here in this esteemed panel of women, I may note. My name is Sarah Welton. I am the director of the GRESB Foundation and Stakeholder Engagement. GRESB is a sustainability benchmark for real assets. So we help provide investors a bit more of transparency into the performance and development operations of their real assets around the world. We're a global standard. We've got stakeholders throughout the globe, and we've been around since about 2009. I've been with the firm for less than a year now, but have been sort of living in the sustainability certification world for over a decade. So it's really nice to be here.
Fantastic. Danielle, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle Brigida, and I'm the Senior Director of Wildlife Communications and Strategy for the World Wildlife Fund in the US. And so if you're unfamiliar with World Wildlife Fund, we are often called the Panda, but we're one of the world's largest conservation organizations. We operate in over 100 countries. I work for the US, and just really excited to be here. Before that, I spent some time working for the Department of the Interior and the US Fish and Wildlife Service, and then also National Wildlife Federation. So I've always loved my work and people, and just talking about it and getting to learn from great communicators like the people here today.
Fantastic. All right. Well, let's dive right in. We're going to start with kind of those bigger questions, but when it comes to climate initiatives, we all know we're hearing what's being talked about at the UN this week and at Climate Week. There's so many different audiences to communicate to, and I think all of you are communicating to a pretty wide range of different stakeholders across the board: consumers, investors, B2B, tech partners, governments. How do you navigate that? What is kind of the first thought and step you take when thinking about the different audiences that you're trying to reach?
I mean, I can kick it off a little bit. I probably have the easiest communication job, maybe, because I'm sort of helping investors figure out the material implications of decisions that have been made by their asset managers. And providing a snapshot in time of what does this look like? Like, where do they stand on the benchmark? But then the other sort of beauty of GRESB is it also provides a roadmap to elevate that conversation and facilitate that conversation between investors and their managers, so they can say, we didn't perform so well in this area. What are the best practices within the standard that we can implement to help improve our performance year on year? So it's pretty, I'll say it's simple, and I'm obviously being a little bit tongue in cheek, but we want to be straightforward, and that's that's the key, right? It's transparency. It's helping to facilitate and simplify the conversation, and allow owners and operators to do what they do best, but to really help them have that guiding light of the direction that to be the most sustainable and resilient.
Fantastic. Danielle, I know when we were speaking earlier, you were talking about how World Wildlife Fund leverages wildlife storytelling, and I thought that was a really interesting concept. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, well, when I approach communications, especially with audiences and especially around topics that I feel like touch on our values, which I think, this kind of work does, sustainability, talking about the future of our entire families and things like that. I think it's great to use wildlife conservation as a really tangible thing that you can do. If you invest in wildlife conservation, you're helping biodiversity, you're helping. So when I was talking about storytelling, WWF relies on great partnerships with communities and government and businesses. But wildlife can be a great way to connect people and weave them through those different channels. And I think that's something that we've been using, and but it's not even really using it. It's just using it's kind of talking about a story in a way that resonates, hopefully, with a lot of people. And so, but I think audience wise, it's a tough, what you're asking is tough, and it's something that I've been trying to figure out for my whole career. It's there are just certain things we learn when we're in this business that we wish more people knew, and we want to share that, not as a way to just talk at people, but as a way to really give it to them and get their ideas and inputs. So that's been my kind of, I guess, task as a communicator, is how do we share the microphone in the right places and always engage. But
Danielle, it just reminds me what we talked about, like it being nonpartisan too. I think that's a really unique thing about wildlife, and not to finish your sentence, but I remember being on a building talking about bees, and actually I have a bee and a bat story similarly. And you bring it up and immediately, oh, we can't have bees, they're gonna sting us. Like, okay, no, they're not. Bees, gonna be okay. And then, but you help them understand the importance, the significance, why it's an important thing to bring, bees to building. And the same thing, I was working on a retail development, and there was a proposal to have bat houses. For whatever reason, it made sense to support the migration and sort of habitat of bats. And of course, similarly, we can't have bats, they'll suck my blood. It's like,
oh no.
Yeah.
But that just tells me I have a lot more work to do, because a lot of misinformation out there.
Sorry.
No, but this is the thing, is like communication is like so important because it helps clear up a lot of these things. So anyway, but no, that's a great point, and something we're constantly thinking about.
Yeah, and I think to that point too, it's a good reminder that the conversation is always evolving, and the messaging is always evolving. So thinking ahead and thinking about what that can look like in the future is always a tricky step, but a necessary step. Amy, when we were talking earlier, you also noted you were talking about local communities and government and countries that you're working with. Would love if you could expand on that more as well.
Sure, of course. Well, I think it's really interesting listening to my peers here and walk us through, how they do this important work. I think we are in such a specific area as a Mission Corp at Meridian, and we have extremely specific goals that we articulate in specific ways. So our stakeholders or the folks that we'd like to be communicating towards really change throughout the life cycle of the project. And maybe I'll just walk you through the way the project works. We're looking to identify opportunities to create essential projects that really transform the lives of the communities in which we build, we create, we innovate. And so really that first step is really about partners, stakeholders, listening, learning, communicating with the community, and clearly understanding what would be most transformational. Really the next step is really more of a public one. And community communication really continues throughout the creation, the building of the project. We're recruiting locally, building capacity. These projects are really platforms for addressing so many of the critical needs of our time at once, whether that's education, health, employment, inclusion, carbon solutions. And it's really not until we have completed the work that a different kind of communication, I think, comes into play. And that really is kind of a leadership, industry-wide, future-facing type of communication, where we really want to use these projects as well as opportunities for emulation and best practice as a mission corp. So it's really a cyclical communications project. And I'd say it's really only upon delivery when communities start to use those assets where we measure the impact, where we see how successful we've been, and all of those different touch points along what we all commonly call the UN SDGs, that we might sort of not only try to transform that into a platform, once again, for emulation, but perhaps be more proactive in our communication in a more traditional kind of PR way to really point to something that we think is part of the solution side.
I love that. I think that's so essential, is thinking about the solution. What solution are we bringing to the market, and how can we continue to focus on that? And we all know when it comes to communications, transparency is really key, especially when we're communicating about sustainability, climate, and the initiatives that fall into those categories. For companies who are really just starting to discover and implement those sustainability practices, what's the first step? Big question, but what can they be doing to ensure that transparency is there from the get-go?
Well, I think I'll just jump in and say that I think that that transparency and the ability to deliver, use communications as a form of accountability, that's that's the mission. That's really what unites us all here today. That's what we're there for, is to really measure. And Sarah can speak more about that, and bring that measurement to the market as a way of evaluating for ourselves, for our partners, for our investors, for the communities that we build in, how successful we've been in delivering the impact that is at the center of the way that the project has been conceived.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. You can't expect to make progress unless you're keeping track of whatever it is, right? And so I would say to anyone who's starting out, just take that first step, take that baby step. Don't be afraid. By not saying anything, I think there's sort of this thought that, if I'm just mum, if I'm just quiet, it's okay, or people will assume I'm doing something. And I think it's quite the opposite. Even from a sort of perception side of things, but also I think from a disclosure side of things, if you say nothing, people are going to assume, or your investors are going to assume, or your customers, your clients, your stakeholders are going to assume you're doing nothing. But on the other side of things, if thinking about the risk side of the equation, if you say nothing, you are effectively saying that there is no risk. to you, to your business. So if all of a sudden, I come from real assets. If all of a sudden your building floods, you didn't know that that was a risk. I mean, you didn't sort of highlight that as a potential, physical risk. So what were your, did you just have your head in the sand? And nothing looks worse than that, to sort of look like you don't have a finger on the pulse of kind of what's going on, or you don't have eyes on your assets. I mean, there's a whole, to value an asset, you've got sort of the NOI element and then the cap rate. And if it appears that you don't sort of have a good sense of what's going on your asset or what's going on around your asset, that essentially elevates the risk of that asset, which essentially creates a much higher cap rate, which creates a much lower valuation. So it's all, kind of baked in there, and you certainly don't want to send or set the perception or that you don't know what's going on.
I think all great points. And what I would add is just, if you can be as clear in your purpose, that's really key. I think a lot of times, I don't know if you read something and you ever feel distrust, but I find that if I don't feel like I understand the purpose of what they're doing, that can, if that doesn't come across clearly, concisely, correctly, all the like 7 C's of communication, I think purpose is an important thing. I would just also add that you don't have to do this alone. Even if you're small, even if no one's heard of you, find a business mentor or reach out to people. Like, do not shoulder this alone, because a lot of us have been involved in it for a long time and, want to see more people in the space. There is absolutely room for everyone. And, one of WWF's themes is together possible, but I 100% buy into that. And I feel like a lot of times whenever I'm overwhelmed, I'm like, wait, there's a group of people. I can reach out to someone, and it can be someone who would normally maybe intimidate me. But the truth is, if you reach out, the last thing, like they might ignore it, but they could actually help you or give good advice. So I would just also recognize that, like, you are part of a group, and we're all in this together. And even if they're competitors, or having some kind of mentor, having people that you can reach out to that will be honest with you, or even loving critics, which I also really like that. I think that's something, if you're brand new at something, you don't enter a room and just like vocalize everything you're feeling. That'll be hard. You talk to people, you get to know them. And I think, like, if you're just getting started and you've launched a new thing, anyone, I think listening first can go a long way, and finding those people that you identify with and respect, and getting more involved with them. That's a good way to enter into a new conversation.
Truth and trust.
Yeah.
And no
Absolutely.
one's journey is this way. Everyone is sort of on this very loop-de-doop journey. And, to your point, like, I have found in my career, like, if you're not sort of on the record, blasting on some sort of public forum, people will be very candid and very helpful. And I think particularly within this space of sustainability, of sort of climate solutions, people are generally quite sincerely helpful.
Absolutely.
I
Oh, go
also
ahead,
think
Amy.
something, I'm sorry, I think something that's very interesting as well. I was, sort of taking a look at the timeline this morning of how we went in our organization over the, past decade plus, to becoming an organization that delivers an extremely detailed impact report each year on every element of all of the work we do, both in the assets and the company that oversees, holds those assets. The corporate piece, if you will, as a B Corp. And there are a dozen dates. I mean, literally every year since 2011, there's been an evolution in the framework on how we report to ourselves, our investors, our constituents, our communities, as do you all. And it began with, the Principles for Responsible Investment, which was a charter, and then it became what we all call the UNSDGs, excuse me. And so it's interesting to look back and remember a time when we didn't have the language. We just said, we followed this very clear vision created by our founder about trying to deliver both social and financial dividends, and started shaping out how that, what that should look like, what we should call it, how we should communicate it. And it's just fascinating to see how that has become so clearly defined. The tools have come online. We began by using a generalized framework. As that evolved, we, chose a framework provider. And after that, we created our own framework. And now we're sharing our framework, making it available for others. And that really follows the timeline of language. Remember, there was a time when it was hard for us to explain years ago exactly what the endpoint was, because there was a less urgent sense, a less critical sense out there in the world. And I feel as this becomes a more generalized and more broadly embraced challenge, and symbolically and literally, the tools we have, the words we have, become more and more refined, and gives us this opportunity to be extremely precise, extremely accountable. And I think there's a door there to generate beyond our specific area of focus, really compelling new way of communicating that is really fact-based. We can call it data-based, but that sounds so dry and unemotional. And I feel there's a huge emotional dimension to the work that we all do. So I think the challenge is there. It's huge. But I also feel that the opportunity that lies behind that door is extremely compelling as someone who's sort of, been communicating across several organizations, numerous trends, and really different sort of philosophical attitudes throughout, through the timeline of my career.
Yeah, that's a great point. Even looking back 5 years and seeing how far we've come, I think is really, really impressive for an industry that's fairly new. Amy, you were talking about fact-based and fact-based communications and how we're speaking with different constituents. Greenwashing, always a fun topic, and always something that really takes the headlines when it does happen. And I think a question that the audience might love to hear your insights on are, as communications professionals, how can we avoid being performative? What does that look like? And what steps can we take there to avoid those more kind of crisis communication situations when it comes to greenwashing?
I mean, I would say that's kind of the essence of this, standards, is to provide, the whole, concept behind certifications and standards, right, is, at least from my perspective, is to have investors be able to put trust in whatever it is that they're scrutinizing. I'll credit a former colleague of mine who would say, I hold up 2 apples and I'm going to feed them to my, child. Which one do I give her? One is organic and one has been sprayed down with pesticides. Well, just looking at them, I have no idea. But you slap an organic label on one of them, and at least there's some level of reliance that one is less pesticide laden than the other. So without assurance, without certifications, without standards, without benchmarks, without these things, we're left to our own assessment, which, quite frankly, it's hard enough being an expert in one thing, but being an expert in everything is quite difficult. So I think we need to rely on, the expertise of others. So I would say when it comes to greenwashing or sort of truth, we need to have trust in the experts out there and rely on the data that has been sort of independently assured. So I would say, greenwashing, but also sort of conflicts of interest baked into who's doing the assessment. I also think that's another really significant flag to at least be aware of. I mean, it's not to say that someone is lying to you if there's a conflict, but there could be a conflict. So,
in a lot of ways, listening to Sarah and as well to you, Danielle, and your excellent point previously that there are people who can help you. There are tools that exist. And I think somehow underneath all of this, there's still that belief that you have to give something up to work for sustainable and resilient solutions. And I think that's one of the big realizations that needs to be wired up at the micro level, because it's not true. And sometimes one needs, lived experiences to say, wow, I got, this was beneficial to me in a financial way, and this was also beneficial to me in a sort of carbon reduction way. You can have that in your at the micro level, at the macro level. But I think beneath the surface, we're no longer waiting for the tools. We've got them, and they're high performing. Having this lie at the core of your company's values gives you the opportunity to really allow people to insert this into their lives in a way that's really transformational, professional by professional by professional, and that creates an extraordinary impact at the larger level. So I think it's really still about creating opportunities and experiences for communities, organizations, investors, team members, media, to continually see proof that you don't have to choose between looking after the climate and its people, the planet and its people, and living the life that you dream of, imagine, want to live. Those things are highly reconcilable today, and doing both of those things at the same time has an extraordinary spectrum of benefits. And I think really at its core, there's still a large part of the world's population for a variety of completely understandable reasons that still has that sometimes unacknowledged barrier. So I think all of the things we do within the course of a given day, Sarah, bringing forth the data and the truth and the proof, Daniela with the stories that you mentioned, Emma with the variety of clients that you guide forward in this space at the agency. I think we're slowly trying to build that or address that sometimes, as I said, unacknowledged bias, that those things are not possible at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, and I love those points. And I think repetition is one of the strongest tools we have in communications. So if we can just keep reminding people that, nature-based solutions like make a huge difference and help healthy businesses come from a healthy planet, like all these things that I feel like people don't realize, or maybe they are now, but there is so much opportunity in this work. And yeah, I think that's a huge point and a really good one. And I'm such a fan of standards. Like, I think that, I think in terms of just setting the bar so that we have something to benchmark, I think it's great. That's something that WWF does really in a really neat way. We noticed that businesses really wanted to assess their risk for biodiversity loss. And so we created a biodiversity risk filter for any business to use. It overlays a number of maps, and so you can take a look at like what is the biodiversity risk. I think going off the assumption, or for me, I think most people want to help. They want to make a difference, and so it's which again, you can't really touch on corruption altogether in your communications, but I would just say that trying to create things so that people who want to get involved can. I think that's I want everyone at the table. And that includes like the local communities, that includes businesses, that includes governments, because it makes for a richer and more valuable conversation. And those are the conservation and sustainability projects that last. So anyway, I love what you all are saying, and I echo it. Repetition.
So there's two of us that love standards.
My mom was she was an audiovisual standards writer. So anyway, very big into standards. Yeah, very cool.
I love it. Well, and I think it points to, at the end of the day, we're all working at companies. We have bosses, and our executives are thinking about the bottom line. And I think those standards, and to the point before about reporting and data, like that all helps us validate the work we do in communications. And we're seeing investment in climate tech companies kind of ebb and flow a little bit, really high in 2001, 2020, 2022, but has since dropped off in the first half of this year. Would love to hear, we can talk about what that looks like in the future, but what role does communications play in that when we're thinking about driving the business forward, while simultaneously honing in on our messaging and telling those bigger stories from a communication standpoint? How do we feed that back to the business?
I'll just say, one of the hindrances when it comes to real assets, one of the hindrances toward adoption of new climate technology is sort of just that risk and all of the inherent kind of hurdles to adoption. And so sharing, again, sort of storytelling, talking, networking with your peers is so critical. Talking about things that work, talking about things that don't work and why, because it might not have worked for me because of X, Y, Z, but it might work for you because you have a sort of a different kind of setup. Data collection within industrial assets, for example, just always comes to the conversation in my world. And so when we figure out ways that it works, sort of share that good news. And actually the Urban Land Institute, does a great job of fostering those conversations because they bring us together potentially with our peers, competitors, but it's also that's just one piece of the equation. And again, helping to kind of drive the industry forward is going to essentially help all of us. And so, yeah, I would say that the sort of the storytelling or sharing what works, because, we need to elevate the businesses behind the climate tech that are doing things well and that are creating successful solutions if we want to incentivize them to keep creating good solutions, because again, they help us run our businesses and operate our real assets better.
I have to admit on this subject, I am in the sweet spot in the sense that I'm the beneficiary of stories that are the result of and compliance doesn't like me to use terms like this, but so I'll proceed it by saying, this is my personal opinion, but teams that are doing extraordinary, innovative, future-facing, complex work every day to deliver these 120 assets that we have across 3 continents, things that I didn't even know were possible before I discovered the company that I work in today. And my job is easy. I get to tell these stories. And because of the vision and the mission and the framework and the accountability that goes along with being the company that we wanted to become and we have become, we begin with that e-bus or that airport terminal or that hydroelectric installation or that biodigester that has changed the lives of people who live in a community. And we tell that story. And when you unpack that story, there's a lot of extremely compelling data, measurement, and proof of impact. But the real story begins with the asset itself. And, I just work with this truly exceptional group of 300 plus people across the world who deliver these projects. And it's the quality of the story that I'm given to tell. And that begins with the deep dive that is so complex. And so I have no merit in inventing these stories. They are real, and I just have the privilege of telling them.
It's fantastic. Anything else to add, Danielle? Anything on your end?
Yeah, I mean, nothing. I just think that I think it's all great, and I just feel like we're at such a crucial moment for all this work, and anytime we can tell a good story. The only thing I struggle with right now, and I think a lot of communicators is I feel like there's so much noise, and so even these great stories I find it's challenging to get the attention, and that's why it's great for Climate Week and things like that, so we can really use that momentum. But I just, part of communications is you always want to be courteous, and I feel like now it's like you're interrupting all the time anytime you create. And so anyway, that's just my only side thought, is this is such a crucial moment, and we need to scale our work, and we need to really sing out loud all the innovation that's happening, because there are amazing things. But I've also just been shocked that we still there's just a lot of noise right now.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point. And that actually leads perfectly into a question we got from one of our audience members. Way to set it up there.
We did not practice this.
Yeah, right. So this audience member noted that she's a one-woman marketing and PR team. So resources are limited, small budgets. But again, we're all really pushing to leverage PR and communications to drive that bottom line. Any tips on where she can start to build that solid PR strategy? I can kick us off if we want.
I was going to say, that is not my wheelhouse. So yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think we've covered a lot of really good strategies that can be pulled down into more tactical elements. But I would say, think about being focused in the stories you're telling and the audiences you want to be reaching. And, identify the outlets where your audiences are reading, and really hone in on those. I think with PR, a lot of times we think more is better. But it's really quality over quantity, in my opinion. And, one great story can have a really big impact. And I think we touched on this a little bit at the beginning too, but I would say too, telling those human stories that are really focused on the solutions that you're bringing to market. Back that up, of course. So we want to make sure we're validating the work that we're doing, and really helping reporters and just your audiences in general, whether it's over social media or whatever, helping them understand the why behind the what.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like what I said about finding a mentor, reaching out to people, joining associations, or anything that you can. I know with a limited budget, you may not be able to do a fancy flashy thing right away, but I actually think that's totally fine. Going back to what Emma was saying, I've been taking on this approach of reduce, reuse, recycle content, because I feel like it goes in with what I try to do, but also quality. Really paying attention to what's going to serve the community you currently have, and give them microphones. Whenever I do outreach or I think about PR, I think about the community you already have, and everyone has a community, even if it is just the people who work there, or immediate partners. So equipping them with communications tools that they can then reach their network. And that's how you reach the crowd. I think about it in that kind of very basic level. But if you can even if a PR campaign can just equip the people who are loyal or the people who care about this topic a lot, everyone has a community. So start there and then branch out. That would be my suggestion. And, from a strategy perspective, I think going back to the why, as Emma said, I think really focus on why you're doing that. Don't get distracted, or just, use those as your roots and grow what you can from there.
Also, just as probably one of the older, if not oldest, women on the call today, to the person who asked that question, I sort of back up and put it in even a broader perspective, which is to say, when I first began pre-digital world, you can do the math on that, it was extremely challenging. There were just not that many places where something that you worked really hard in a meaningful way to bring to the market could just spark somewhere, intentionally, and sometimes with a bit of serendipity as well. That kind of opportunity didn't exist the way it exists today. So I really want to give a word of encouragement. You never know who's going to bring that extra push, because the story you're telling is unique, familiar, strikes a very personal chord, lines up with the news of the day. I mean, there are so many reasons why that digital universe could embrace your story. And I'd say first and foremost, to me from observation, would be that there are people in that middle ground that aren't super solicited, but can help you scale up quickly and are looking to be part of the kind of receiving end and then the scaling up end. And there's a lot of ways to understand and see, monitor what's important to them. So if you invest the time in finding someone in that middle ground who can be the next step to scaling out your message, and they're there waiting for it, that's their job, that's their vocation. They're part of your chain, and people present a lot more information about the kinds of things that interest them today than 20 years ago, where it was really kind of looking at a reporter's archives. I think if you spend some time researching that sort of virtual chain of escalation of voice share, I think you can, make interesting things happen in our digital world.
The only thing I'll add is just insert yourself in conversations or listen to what is being discussed and sort of respond to that, yes and, right? I hear what you're saying and then I have this to contribute, and elevate other people's stories. People love to be, have their stories told. So allow their stories to be your message. I was talking to a colleague about a panel they were attending during Climate Week, and they said it was hosted by, so-and-so, and there was 2 other panelists, and then they had 3 of their own individuals from that company on the panel. And I was like, what a boring panel. I don't want to hear about you from you. Bring your people in, elevate the stories from outside to help sort of elevate that conversation. Because I don't just want to sort of listen to a sales pitch by 3 of your salespeople. I want to hear how you're relevant within this conversation. That's the cool part of, communications, is the storytelling, the relevance, and the connectivity and the connecting to, others who are on a similar or connected journey.
Absolutely. I don't know if this saying is kosher in a discussion about climate communications, but a rising tide lifts all boats. And that's that's so important in this industry. We have another question that I think is a really interesting one. In your opinion, what's the biggest lesson learned regarding sustainability and environmental efforts in the last 5 to 10 years?
not
hard
specific to
one.
communications, just like
However you want to
all of it.
Recycling. So you said that, and I say the communications around solutions, and we collectively have been lied to by industry in a lot of levels. I mean, you said reduce, reuse, recycle, right? Reduce, reuse, recycle is the last one. What do? We only recycle, except me. I have all my glass jars that I reuse, much to my husband's chagrin. But this whole like littering, recycle, we as consumers have been told it's our fault. It's not our fault. I mean, so anyways, that's my sort of personal pet peeve is like.
Yeah. Trying to think of what really blew my mind, like in the past 5 to 10 years, which a lot has happened. So honestly, I'm excited there's a climate week. I remember when we were trying to talk climate change and it was the most polarizing, terrifying thing. And I do think when you hear climate change, there's a lot of fear and a lot of angst and a lot of feeling disempowered. And I think that that's something that I hope has changed. But I agree with you that it's not our fault. It's just we need so many people to help us write this. But yeah, it's not about, I guess that's the thing that a good reminder is like we belong on Earth. Like we don't have to feel guilty all the time. And I think that's something that but I wouldn't say it's the biggest lesson learned, but I think it's a good reminder that, we can have great relationships with our planet and still be, in many ways, living our best lives, I guess. So.
One of the, this is once again a bit more micro, but one of the things I thought was very interesting was sort of the packaging of the funding in the US for climate change initiatives. And just quite simply, the fact that it was really called the Jobs Act, and that a way of allowing people, regardless of political point of view, to connect directly with the opportunities that would be unlocked by that, by connecting them to jobs, which in fact they do and they are. But had that been handled a different way, something more directly connected to the more politicized aspects of conservation and resiliency and sustainability, it might not have been, I think, met with such success in terms of the communication side of it. So I thought that was an interesting choice.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Looks like I don't know if we'll get to all of the questions that are coming in through chat, but these are really great. I think one that I can quickly address and just kind of give a high level response to is around kind of the changing communication cycle based on what's going on in the political world, based on what's going on in the world in general, and how to navigate that. I think from a company point of view, the biggest thing is to really focus on your company's mission, values, and your vision, and really lean into that, regardless of kind of all of the other noise that happens outside. There are always going to be ways to, insert yourself into conversations that are relevant to you, and that again speak to your target audiences. So I think that's a really big thing to keep in mind. What is inherent to you as a company, and how do you play in that space? But I'll open it up to everyone else if they have any thoughts on that as well.
I try and find the universal.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead, Daniel.
I was just going to say, I think we share a lot of universal values. And so I do, my last name's Brigida, and my friends always joke that I'm always trying to Brigida the gap. But it's one of those things where like we share a lot of values, and there's actually a really neat study called the Nature for Americans study, and it asked people like, do you think understanding nature is important? You know, just and I think like I think there's an understanding that you know, there's a value in having trees so we can breathe, and you know, like all these things, water. So I think a lot of that comes back to us, and we do hold those values. Now, depending on like our living situation, like and just how polarized we feel or attacked we feel by certain communications, you know, I think there's all that. But I try and go with value-based communications whenever possible, if what we're doing allows for it. Um, and I think you're right, like, yeah, it's felt very like you're kind of pulled in one direction or another, but at the same time, you know, I do think outcomes. I think a lot about my grandfather, who like was very much about conserving, and was very much about like paying attention to things, and you know, political party or not, like he cared about and so I look to the value-based communications, and I also just try and recognize that even if it's couched in a different way, if it's achieving the same outcome or if it's achieving a good outcome, I try and pay attention to that. But it's definitely, it's a good question.
Something I was going to add is just to be specific about what you're talking about, and like the term or the acronym ESG is coming under a lot of fire recently for a lot of reasons, and some of them I actually agree with. You know, if you were to ask, you know, all of us, what does ESG mean? We'd all come up with different statements, and chances are most of us would be wrong, because most people, even that work in the space, don't know sort of what that means. And when you use terms that people don't know what they mean, then they feel dumb, and people don't want to feel dumb. So use words that people understand, be specific about what you're talking about, because the worst thing, and what is sort of happening in this political climate, is ESG, sustainability, whatever, is being misrepresented as what it's not, because people can't necessarily discern, because again, most people don't know what it means. And then the baby's getting thrown out with the bathwater, and it's getting sort of polarized, demonized, you know, all the other eyes. And that doesn't bring us anywhere. So, you know, back to Danielle's point, like, we're all trying to reach the goal line. How you get there, your journey may be different than my journey, but if we're all sort of helping us move the ball forward, okay, like that's fine with me. But so I would just say, sort of be specific with what your intentions, what your goals, what metrics you're using. Be specific about them, be precise, and and say what you mean. So that way you aren't left people guessing, because then they're just gonna sort of throw it out if they don't understand.
Fantastic. We're coming up on time, so I'd love to do a quick rapid fire round of questions before we wrap. So if you can keep your responses to 30 seconds or less, I think we'll be in good shape. Which companies, or one company, have gotten sustainability messaging right, and why?
I will again take the easy route and sort of say, our final results are coming out imminently, and I would say the companies that are landing in those, sort of GRES 5-star, achieving those high marks, I would put them into the category. Now, that's not to discount the others, because, to my earlier point, at least they're on the journey and going, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step, or however many miles, all of them begin with one step. So I would say those that are actually taking time or taking the effort to demonstrate their work are winning it in my opinion.
Amy,
We have a lot of great partners. I don't know I'm not sure. I don't want to show favoritism necessarily, but I will just put out there that I think from a sustainability standpoint, looking at their entire operation and everything else, I've been impressed with how Patagonia has kind of led in a lot of ways. So that's just one. And we have a lot of fantastic partners that are working really hard to look at their entire system. And so we have an entire team that kind of works with companies and focuses on that. And so there are a lot of inspiring stories from that, but a group that I think everyone's seen in the news or at least is working to do that. That's one that comes to mind.
Absolutely.
I would just say that I think what we're starting to see in terms of annual impact reports is a very revealing, place to make the distinction between PR and reporting. And they're both important communication steps. And I would just say, I think that that's an interesting place to look.
Fantastic. Last question. What's your biggest and final piece of advice for the audience?
Start. Just start. I mean, get help, but kind of keeping your head in the sand is not an option. One sort of anecdote I'll tell is, I used to walk into buildings and we certified buildings for their sort of health attributes. And, owners would say, oh, I can't try to achieve certification because what if I don't achieve it? What if I score poorly? What if my air quality is bad? And I would hold up my smartphone and say, I know what your air quality is. And I have a nose. I know what your air quality is. I mean, I can't tell you how many certified buildings I've been in. I'm like, I can smell the formaldehyde. I know what's going on here. People are not stupid. And you just kind of keeping your mouth shut is not a solution. And the last thing you want is to be sort of caught looking like you don't know what's going on, because the worst thing particularly for investors, is surprises. Just disclose, tell them what's going on, track what's happening, because staying quiet is kind of it's not really an option, but it also just makes you look like you don't know what's going on.
Transparency, accuracy, empathy.
Love it.
There was a recent study published in Nature that was an independent group of scientists appointed by the UN to kind of look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And apparently we're not on track to meet any of them. And, essentially we cannot rely on change to happen organically. So getting started is important. And so I would just say, as you're communicating, as much as you can, think about the golden rule or, how you want to be treated. Don't lecture, because that hasn't gotten us anywhere. To touch on how it hasn't worked, right? So that would be my thing, is I always go back to the golden rule. And if I wouldn't want to read something that I'm producing, I really try and change it so that I would, because we're finite with time. We just need to work. So
Right on.
Fantastic. Well, that's a great way to end. Thank you so much to our panelists and to everyone in the audience for joining us today. As we talked about, this is a growing community and no one needs to work in a silo. So please reach out if you have questions that you can connect with, I think, all of us on LinkedIn, and we'd be glad to connect again. And yeah, look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks, everyone.